Are South African banks doing enough in the minds of their consumers? A recent study says the answer is overwhelmingly no. More than 30,000 consumers threatened to leave their banks in the last year. And Capitec has come out as the top bank, according to BrandsEye's 2018 SA Banking Sentiment Index. And joining me now from Cape Town is BrandsEye's Chief Marketing Officer, Nick Ray, with more. Nick, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, the use of the word sentiment is key in the naming of this index. Is it fair to say you set about gauging how people feel about their bank?
Yes, and thank you for having me, and that's precisely correct. What we were trying to do is use the millions of conversations on social media by South Africans about their banks to really understand how consumers were experiencing their products and services.
Now, the survey's been running for a few years. What are the major trends you picked up this time around in comparison to your last survey?
Well, overall, South Africans complained less about banks in this study in 2018 than they did last year. But overall, the industry is still net negative. And what I mean by that is more people are complaining than praising their banks. Once again, Capitec was on top with being the only bank in South Africa that had a positive net sentiment from consumers. But they did decline by 9% year on year, which I think maybe goes to show that the honeymoon period for Capitec is over. However, I think Absa and Standard Bank were the big losers, with Standard Bank dropping by almost 10% year on year and is now South Africa's least liked bank, according to social media.
Wow, now taking into consideration that not all South Africans are on social media or even use social media, how did you weight the different streams of information that you incorporated into this index?
So BrandsEye uses a unique combination of artificial intelligence and human intelligence to try understand the social conversation at scale. So what we do is we take all of the tweets and Facebook comments and Instagram posts and Hello Peter comments that South Africans make about the 5 major banks, and we try structure that for sentiment. And what makes it unique in terms of BrandsEye's process is that we use crowds of South Africans, so large numbers of people, to actually view the individual tweets and Facebook comments and try to decipher the sentiment of the author, but also, very importantly, what are the specific reasons why? Why is someone unhappy, or why is it sad? Is it got to do with pricing? Is it got to do with wait times, banking products? And really try to get to the nuanced understanding of what's driving the sentiment behind the consumer's experience.
Now, some of the big-name banks would perhaps say to you that their markets for the different banks are a little bit different. You can't compare apples and pears, as it were. You can't compare, they'd say, FNB or Standard Bank with the overall core clientele of Capitec, because they have different ways of communicating with their clientele. What would you say to that?
I think that is somewhat true. I think different banks and different brands have created different expectations from their consumers. But bear in mind, we looked at over 1.7 million posts. So that covers a wide range of South Africans from different demographics and different walk of life. And overall, as I said, people were more likely to complain about their bank than praise. And those banks that had an incumbent legacy of brand and experience, brands like Standard Bank and Nedbank, they had very grumpy customers. In fact, Standard Bank and Nedbank customers were the most likely to threaten to leave in this year's study.
Now, of that percentage that threatened to leave, I believe, according to your index, over 30,000 consumers spoke about leaving their bank over the last year. How many of them actually followed through on that threat, and what were their main reasons?
So we can't actually tell the numbers yet in terms of movement of customers from one bank to another. What we could see from social media, as you said, is that over 30,000 of them threatened to leave their bank. And that's literally the people who have gone to social media and said, I am going to leave you, Standard Bank or Absa or whoever that might be. And so I think that represents a very, just the tip of the iceberg of consumers who feel that way. But only a small percentage of them will actually go to social media to make that threat. So I think the number of unhappy customers are much larger. And given that there's a lot of innovation happening in the industry at the moment, both from the incumbents like FNB and Capitec, but also from new entrants like Discovery and Bank Zero, I think we can expect a lot more option for customers and a lot more movement coming into 2019.
Are we seeing a huge increase in the amount of resources that banks are throwing behind their digital consumer relationship?
Yes, the overall share of voice around digital conversation, and by digital conversation we define that as anyone who's talking about the app, about the online banking, about digital safety and security, or business or technological innovation. So we looked at that in this year's study, and we called that the digital index. That made up 24% of all the conversation around banks in South Africa this year, so consumers are definitely talking about it. And FNB was by far the dominant player there, with the only net positive sentiment towards their digital innovation. And that drove almost 36% of the total conversation about digital innovation came from FNB.
Some fascinating insight there. We thank you for your time. BrandsEye's Chief Marketing Officer, Nick Ray, joining us from Cape Town, and we thank you for your time.